November 22nd, 1963 is a point in history that has arguably shaped all of modern society. It's the day when the world was shaken and the fictional might of the most powerful man in the world was proven a falsehood. It is the day when the President of the United States was murdered in front of the entire world.
It was considered the day television was no longer in its adolescence, due to the tragic and shocking event being covered live on the news. It all culminated when the assassin Lee Harvey Oswald was himself assassinated on live TV while being transferred to a different police station. The event had an effect on the entire world from that point on. Life would never be as vivaciously serene as it had been during the previous decade. Some might say the American dream died that day.
The assassination itself has been subject to numerous conspiracy theories and an absurd amount of speculation throughout the years since that fateful day. But today, we will tell you the truth, what really happened, as well as who really killed John F. Kennedy. It all started when President John F. Kennedy and his wife Jacqueline made a trip to Dallas, Texas, to hold a meeting to build peace between Ralph Yarborough and John Connally. However, peace was never an option, as Kennedy was a controversial leader and made several powerful enemies during his tenure as the first president with the X gene. The motorcade route was announced 4 days prior, giving the true assassin of Kennedy plenty of time to plan the attack that would play out as the vehicles passed the grassy knoll. In a parade-like convoy, the president's ruthless vehicle was left helpless and vulnerable at the time of 12:30 p.m. What history is largely neglected to inform us is just how many shooters were involved, and who was holding those rifles that ended America's vision of safety for many decades to come. Lee Harvey Oswald is one of the most notable perpetrators of the crime. But did he act alone? In a sense, he was assisted by powers far greater than one could imagine. The fatal shooting was filmed on that day by onlooker Abraham Zapruder, who was very much oblivious that day to what was happening mere feet behind him. As known vigilante Edward Blake fired a shot that hit Kennedy directly in the head, causing his brain to splinter backwards and forcing skull fragments onto the rear of the vehicle. Edward Blake is a former covert government operative that later served in Vietnam, but was discharged due to his violent tendencies and erratic behavior during missions. Blake was positioned behind Zapruder with the intention to shoot at him at the event due to a brief altercation they had at a bar the previous night. But on the day in question, Blake was still heavily inebriated due to the excessive recreational drinking that morning, and missed his shot, hitting Kennedy instead by pure mistake. Upon realizing this accident, Blake then lowers his rifle and begins to pack his belongings, being so nonplussed by this experience that he never stopped smoking his Cuban cigar. A fine piece of irony, given Kennedy's history.
However, Edward Blake is far from the only second shooter. The second shooter is a man by the name of James Buchanan Barnes. James was a member of the U.S. Army serving multiple tours in World War II. He was pronounced MIA before he could be properly discharged. Although he was thought to be dead, it is now clear he has ties to some sort of Soviet-sympathizing terrorist organization. Barnes was spotted on a water tower in Irving, Texas. He is photographed here readying his rifle of an unknown caliber. He took his shot at 12:27 p.m. This was also a fatal blow.
You may be wondering just how many suspects were involved, but the assassination was also subject to multiple heroic yet ultimately futile attempts at being prevented. As stated before, Kennedy was the first presidential-elect to be born with the X gene, making him a prime target for recruitment and collusion by the wanted mutant terrorist Eric Lyncher, also known as Max Eisenhardt, also known as Magnus, also known as the leader of the terrorist cell, the Brotherhood of Mutants, also known as the Brotherhood of Evil Mutants, also known as the Brotherhood. Being a sympathizer with Kennedy's plight as a mutated American, he attempted to stop Lee Harvey Oswald's second shot, but was immediately tackled by a Secret Service agent, causing his magnetic effect over the bullet to behave sporadically, and curving the bullet's path in an odd pattern that would hit Kennedy and Governor John Connally, thus resulting in the magic or bent bullet theory. Lyncher was placed in protective custody until his prison break in 1973. His current whereabouts are unknown.
Lencher's story is a tragic one, as he was one of the only men who attempted to do the right thing that day. And yet the American people's mutant bias was so strong at the time that he was immediately believed to be one of the assassins. He was tackled to the ground despite being about 4 feet away from another of the second gunmen, the man known as the Ultimate Red Skull, who had fired from the grassy knoll with a silenced pistol at Kennedy's head. This was a fatal shot. The Secret Service had seen him earlier, but assumed he was merely an American veteran with a slight facial deformity given to him in combat.
Further sealing Kennedy's demise was the bullet fired from the 5th floor of the book depository by none other than Alex Mason, a former CIA operative and Russian sleeper agent who was carrying out his mind-controlled programming that was given to him in the Vorkuta Gulag by an inmate named Viktor Reznov. This bullet slightly grazed Kennedy's upper ear before ricocheting off the pavement, causing debris to strike the spectator by the name of James T. Tague on the cheek.
This is not a fatal shot. The mark from the bullet has never been found due to the bullet completely disintegrating into the asphalt. The weather of the next few days, along with the traffic and street sweepers, cover up the impact, turning the crater into nothing but a small dimple in the road.
The conspiracy deepens as we investigate one of the less famous assassins involved in the murder. The obscure Lee Harvey Oswald is also speculated by many to have had at least some input on the death of J.F.K. Oswald was an ex-Marine sharpshooter for the U.S. military, who had known ties to the Soviet Communist Party, as well as a burning hatred for the American government.
Wake up, you fucking fascists! Wake up! I will kill you! I'll fucking kill you!
However, Oswald was not always in control of his actions, as over the last several years leading up to that fateful day, his body was controlled at random intervals by the quantum-leaping consciousness of Dr. Samuel Beckett, a physicist whose mind would switch places with strangers throughout history. A strange affliction. Yet, on the day of the assassination, Oswald's personality became more dominant in the body than Beckett's, forcing the otherwise kind-hearted scientist to nearly commit the act himself. At the last minute before firing his 3 shots, Beckett was interrupted by this man, James Franco. The famed Hollywood actor was researching for a college project by traveling to the year 1963 in order to stop Oswald's attempt on Kennedy's life. In altering the timeline, Beckett's personality was able to quantum leap into the body of Secret Service agent Clint Hill just before Oswald finally took his shots. Franco and his girlfriend at the time, Sadie, then began a physical altercation with Oswald that ended with Franco incapacitating the sniper with his own rifle before the police were able to apprehend him. Oswald's second shot, as stated previously, was nearly deflected by Eric Lencher before the Secret Service became involved. His third made contact. Sam Beckett's consciousness did not see Lencher as a threat due to his original time period, where mutant Americans were more accepted by the general public, and instead opted to jump in the way of Oswald and Mason's shots that would have hit Kennedy's wife, Jacqueline. Unbeknownst to Beckett, as he possessed the body of Clint Hill, Jacqueline Kennedy was switched out earlier that day with a body double, a woman by the name of Allison Hargreaves, who had spoken directly to Kennedy moments before the chaos, using her reality manipulation powers to cause his head to explode in addition to the explosion caused by the impact of the rifle and pistol shots. Had Sam Beckett in the body of Clint Hill not leapt in the way of Hargreaves to protect her, Kennedy's head would have been slightly easier to identify.
Using cutting-edge, modern technology on the exhumed body of Kennedy, researchers have discovered this was actually the body of none other than one Joseph Fitzgerald, a historian from the year 2172. After confirming his name and occupation, we also learned that he had prevented John Kennedy's death that day in an alternative timeline.
After finding what he had done changed the future to an assured nuclear war, he disclosed confidential temporal information to the now very much alive president.
Then, being made aware of the effect his survival had on the rest of the world, John agreed to travel through time to correct the future. Rather than allowing his ancestor to die an unnecessary death, Joseph devised a plan.
Joseph Fitzgerald swapped places with Kennedy just before the intense multi-impact had shattered his skull. Due to the sheer amount of rounds and/or reality-altering powers that had supposedly caused Kennedy's demise, the ballistics forensics have revealed that all of these rounds collided with each other to the point of disintegration, leaving only 2 fragments behind. James Franco was arrested at the scene and questioned for his involvement. In order to preserve the timeline where Kennedy was believed dead, he received a phone call from a cleverly devised life model decoy provided by the CIA and one Nicholas J. Fury, thanking him for saving the president's life so he would get back to his original timeline, falsely believing he had prevented the Vietnam War to get an A in his physics class. He failed his final.
That Air Force has caused itself more grief with that silly bastard. Did you see the Post this morning? Then I want that fella's incompetent who had his picture taken next to Mrs. Kennedy's bed, if that's what it is. I mean, he's a silly bastard. I wouldn't have him running a cat house. Well, this is obviously a fuck-up.
Eric Lencher, James Barnes, Alex Mason, and the Ultimate Red Skull are still at large. Edward Blake unfortunately passed away due to an accident in his New York apartment in the mid-'80s. Respected private investigator Walter Kovacs suspects foul play. Lee Harvey Oswald passed away due to an accident involving dramatic irony a few days later.
It was our pleasure to bring these facts and truths to light, and finally close the book on this age-old mystery.
Who exactly filmed all of these events is however still up for speculation, and is a source of heated contention and debate among our own team of researchers. Thankfully, the real John F. Kennedy survived the ordeal with minor injuries and has gone on to teach at the University of Harvard in the year 2172.